Hey everybody, good morning. Welcome to the Online Pathways Church gathering. My name is Nick, and we are glad that you are hanging out with us today. We are all together online today. It's just like a throwback. It's like we did for a year and a half. We get to all be online together again today. And you say, well, is this really live or did you pre-record this? Well, I can prove it. I can prove that we are live right now today because how else would I know that the Washington Huskies beat the Oregon Ducks in football last night? Wait, hold on. What's that? Oh, wait, they didn't win? The Ducks won. Oh, okay. All right. I'm wrong. The Ducks actually won. Oh, wait, I did know that. Okay, it's a really great day. Hopefully, you aren't too bummed out about the game. Hopefully, you remembered to set your clocks back. I believe I just noticed that Facebook itself did not remember. So, our live stream was actually scheduled for 11 a.m. because Facebook forgot the time change, which kind of brings us to the point of why are we doing this anyway. But anyway, hopefully you got a good extra sleep last night, and hopefully you took advantage of that, which would be great. If this is your first time hanging out with this group or stumbling upon us and you want to learn more about what type of church this is that you just discovered, you can find out more by going to our website at findpathways.com. We have our core values listed at the bottom of the screen there, and on our website you can read a little bit more about what we mean by those. But if this is your first introduction to us, we usually like to present ourselves with two words to describe who we are. One is cautious, the other is curious. We're sort of a cautious bunch in that many of us are kind of skeptical of organized religion. And we have a lot of questions about things too, because even though we're skeptical about organized religion, many of us have made commitments to follow Jesus with our lives. And there's things that we've learned in the past that we're starting to discover maybe we need to learn new ways forward to think about those things. So we're a curious bunch. We like to ask questions. And so if either of those two words describes you, you might find a really good home here with this community. Now, what we're going to be doing here is some housekeeping. We're going to be doing some singing now. Billy, our worship leader, is going to lead us in a couple songs. In between two songs, there's kind of a reflective video. And we say this every week, but the general idea here is we're all together today online. So if you want to stand up and sing along, you're welcome to do that. Or sit down with your coffee and your pajamas. It's a cold, blustery day, and you just kind of want to sing along on your couch all wrapped up in a blanket. That's great too. But the whole general idea of this, whether you sing out loud or not, is just an idea, is just an opportunity for us to begin to recognize that God is with us, that He's right here with us. And of course He is, all the time. It's just that our awareness of God's presence is what is often lacking. And so we kind of use this moment as sort of a rev up, a warm up, if you will, right? To begin, maybe you didn't wake up just thinking about God this morning. That's okay. This time here is just an opportunity of reflection where we can begin to become aware that God is here with us. And so we're going to sing a little bit. Then I'm going to come back. We're doing a series right now called The Death of Religion. And we're going to be looking at some fun words of Jesus here today. So I'll come back and we'll talk about that. And then finally, we're going to wrap up with a time of communion. And so when we're in person, we have those elements already provided for you. But as you're at home, this would be a good chance to go around the house, find some leftover bread or crackers, maybe some juice, some leftover wine from last night, whatever you got there, some elements. So just represent the body and the blood of Jesus. And one of the religious things that we're going to do today is have an opportunity to take communion. And so if you want to participate in that with us, just find a couple items that you can use for that. Okay, that's pretty much it. We're going to go and Billy's going to lead us in some music, like I said, and then I'll jump back in and we'll continue with our series, The Death of Religion. All right, Billy, take it away.
kingdom so strong now shaken. We trust forever in your name, the name of Jesus. We trust the name of Jesus. You are the only King forever. Almighty God, we lift you higher. You are the only King forever, forevermore. You are victorious. You are the only King forever. Almighty God, we lift you higher. You are the only King forever, forevermore. You are victorious. Yes, Lord. Unmatched in all your wisdom, in love and justice you will reign, and every knee will bow. We bring our expectations, our hope is anchored in your name, the name of Jesus. Oh, we trust the name of Jesus. You are the only King forever. Almighty God, we lift you higher. You are the only King forever, forevermore. You are victorious. You are the only King forever. Almighty God, we lift you higher. You are the only King forever, forevermore. You are victorious. We lift our banner high. We lift the name of Jesus. From age to age you reign. Your kingdom has no end. We lift our banner high. We lift the name of Jesus. From age to age you reign. Your kingdom has no end. You are the only King forever. Almighty God, we lift you higher. You are the only King forever, forevermore. You are victorious. You are the only King forever. Almighty God, we lift you higher. You are the only King forever, forevermore. You are victorious. Oh.
Feels like I've spent my whole life trying to be someone else in this world of expectations where value lies in what others want you to be. I've become everything this world demands of me, and so I've buried my truth and I've hidden my soul away. I've hidden my deepest urges, stilled the dancing in my feet, hushed the music that swells through my spirit, ignored the dreams that cry to be free. I've locked up my struggles for fear of upset, cast off my honesty in case I offend, covered up my questions with fervent prayers, filled the silence with resounding songs, denied my pain, stopped my tears, silenced my screams in a world that deems them indecent. I've patched up my brokenness with busyness, gagged my fears with postures of faith, while in reality, my head is swimming with doubts, and I hide, pretending to be someone who's got it all figured out. But when the doors are closed and the pressures flee, there is one who comes to me, calling to those places I've buried and erased, where my longings lie tethered in shame, and a voice that's forgotten how to speak, and my shattered self-belief, and my thirsting soul crying to be free. And it is here that love breathes, on the embers of a fading flame, drawing the mask from my face, speaking my true name, and calling to my soul to rise again. Because love doesn't cover up weakness, but embraces those that life has beaten. Love lets tears flow freely. Love laments richly the pain of living. Love speaks out fears with no fear of opinion. Love accepts that sometimes love is forsaken. Love wears the wounds as signs of greatness. Love holds the wrongs. Love sings its truest song. Love dances like a child. Love dreams fiercely, wildly, with no need to impress. For love knows its magnificence and shows it to the world. Love holds me, speaks to me, and this is what love says. I want you as you are, child of grace. Come out from the shadows and show me your face. Look into my gaze and see yourself revealed, my perfection.
In the darkness, we were waiting, without hope, without light, till from heaven you came running. There was mercy in your eyes, to fulfill the law and prophets. To a virgin came the word, from a throne of endless glory to a cradle in the dirt. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. To reveal the kingdom coming and to reconcile the lost, to redeem the whole creation. You did not despise the cross, for even in your suffering you saw to the other side. knowing this was our salvation. Jesus, for our sake you died. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. In the morning that you rose, all of heaven held its breath, till that soul was moved for good. For the Lamb had conquered death, and the dead were from their tombs, and the angels stood in awe. For the souls of all who come to the Father are restored, and the church was Christ was born. Then the Spirit lit the flame. Now this gospel truth of old shall not kneel, shall not faint. By his blood and in his name, in his freedom I am free. For the love of Jesus Christ, who has resurrected me. Oh, and praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever
Oh my goodness. The issues never stop. With those of you who are watching on YouTube, this has been a very seamless experience. But for those of you watching on Facebook, I know as usual, when we live stream on Facebook, things have gone a little haywire. And, YouTube is really great to us. Facebook, not so much, right? So anyway, hopefully you've hung with us here. If for some reason Facebook becomes unstable again, you can always join us over on our YouTube page, and things, I assure you, will continue flawlessly over there. Wow, well, we are continuing with the spooky theme. Last week, we got to do a fun Halloween party at church, and it was super fun. People were dressed up, and oh, there's a good one. Look at Patty. She made her own costume. We had the entire Helm family. Look at them, looking snazzy. Oh, look at Mark and Lori, two high school sweethearts. We had a couple airbenders show up, and of course Ted Lasso was in the house. It was a super fun time, and we had a bunch of candy, and we got to dress up in costumes and all of that. And I thought, it's so fun. Halloween gets one day, and then it's over. And I thought, I don't want to stop celebrating Halloween, right? I mean, I like candy. I like dressing up, all this. And I thought, but now it's over, except I found a loophole. We can keep celebrating Halloween if we just do a sermon series with a spooky theme. And so this sermon series is continuing on. So what that means is we've got more candy. So next week when we meet in person, I'm going to bring more candy. And okay, just to cut right to the chase, yes, I did buy way too much candy at Costco. And I feel a little silly trying to go back to Costco and return bags of unopened candy. So I'm not going to do that. So instead, we are going to just eat a whole bunch of candy for the next few weeks. So I'm going to bring it so we can get rid of all this candy. Now, speaking of buying candy at the store, I noticed something when I went to the store the other day to buy this candy, something kind of weird. That when I was getting ready to check out of the grocery store, they were putting all of my stuff in plastic bags. And I thought that was kind of weird because Washington State recently enacted a single-use plastic bag ban. And yet they were putting all of my groceries in a plastic bag. And I was really excited because I thought it's going to be all paper bags. And secretly, I love those paper bags. I love that they're, like flat and square at the bottom so you can just put stuff in it. It doesn't fall over in the back of your car. Love the paper bags. Totally looking forward to the paper bags. But I get to the store and instead they still have plastic bags. And so I asked the clerk, I said, what's the deal here? I thought you couldn't use plastic bags anymore. And he said, well, no, you can't use single-use plastic bags. He says, these plastic bags are reusable. And so he handed me one, and I picked it up, and I held it, and I looked at it. It looked exactly the same as the old plastic bags, but it was thicker. It wouldn't break. It was pretty thick, right? It was probably 3 times the thickness of the old one, but otherwise, it was the same old bag. And so I said, okay, are people really reusing them? And he said, no, of course not. It's a loophole. I said, what? He said, it's a loophole. We make bags that actually have more plastic in them than they did before, and now we just call them reusable. And nobody reuses them, but we get to charge for them now, and it's still a plastic bag. It is a loophole. And you've gotta love loopholes, don't you? Aren't you a fan of loopholes? When you try to kind of get by with something without technically being in violation. You know what a loophole is, right? It's an ambiguity in a system which can be used to circumvent or otherwise avoid the actual intent of the system or the law. And a loophole in a law often violates the intent of the law without technically breaking it. And I loved loopholes as a kid, didn't you? Loved loopholes. There were things I didn't want to do. I didn't want to be guilty of not doing them, but I would always look for a loophole. It's summed up best by one of my favorite cartoons of all time, Calvin and Hobbes. And you remember the old Calvin and Hobbes cartoon? Explain Newton's first law of motion in your own words. Calvin has no idea what that is, and so he just makes up a bunch of words, right? Because these are his own words, and he says, I just love loopholes, right? I loved loopholes as a kid, always trying to find a way out. Technically, he answers the question, but clearly that is not the intent of the question. But it turns out that adults actually like loopholes too, especially when it comes to saving money on your taxes. It is always nice to find a loophole to save some money. And there are a whole bunch of great examples that we could point out here. I mean, we could be here for the rest of the sermon time talking about examples of corporations finding loopholes, but one of my favorites has to do with the Ford Company. Ford famously evades tax requirements on its work vans, shown here. There's a 1963 chicken tax that imposes a 25% tariff on all imported light trucks, right? Ford didn't want to pay 25% tariff on its imported light trucks made elsewhere, brought in here. So Ford shipped them as commercial vehicles that had no tariff on them. So these were built overseas, and they had back windows in them, they had rear seats, they even had seat belts. And then these vehicles were exported from Turkey, where they were made, arrive in Baltimore, Maryland, and are converted into light trucks, where the rear windows are removed and they are replaced with metal panels. The rear seats are taken out because these aren't intended to be commercial vehicles. They need that open space for being used as a commercial truck, and the seat belts, of course, then are removed as well. And this whole conversion process costs Ford hundreds of dollars per van, but it also allows them to save thousands of dollars per van worth in tariffs and taxes. I mean, it is a loophole, right? They're clearly going to be commercial light-duty trucks, but they ship them as simple, just regular passenger vehicles. Corporations are famous for finding loopholes to evade tax dollars. Loopholes, you get it? You know what they are? It's a way to get what you want, technically, without actually breaking the rules, getting off on a technicality. And lawyers are great at this. In fact, it's basically their job. It's their job to find all these little technicalities and loopholes for their clients. And it turns out that not just lawyers are good at this, but also religious people too. And in fact, in Jesus' day, the religious leaders were also the lawyers. And what a great combo to have religious leaders and lawyers be the exact same person. Now, we're doing a series here called The Death of Religion, and we're looking at this section of the Gospels, Matthew chapter 23, which are called the 7 woes of Jesus. And a woe is something like a curse. It is Jesus pronouncing some curses on the religion of his day. He's saying, here are the things that will kill a religion and curse the people who do them. And so today we catch our next woe, and it's all about, you guessed it, loopholes. Let's read it together. Matthew 23, verse 16 is where we will start. Woe to you, or cursed are you, blind guides. You say, if anyone swears by the temple, it means nothing. But anyone who swears by the gold of the temple is bound by that oath. You blind fools, which is greater, the gold or the temple that makes the gold sacred? You also say, if anyone swears by the altar, it means nothing. But anyone who swears by the gift on the altar is bound by that oath. You blind men, which is greater, the gift or the altar that makes the gift sacred? Therefore, anyone who swears by the altar swears by it and everything on it. And anyone who swears by the temple swears by it and by the one who dwells in it. And anyone who swears by heaven swears by God's throne and by the one who sits on it. Now, there seems to be some technicalities here that Jesus is discussing. Notice it was pretty specific, right, about the temple and the altar. It reads here like Jesus is addressing some very specific things that these people all seem to know about, and it has to do with how you take an oath or how you promise something. Give an assurance that you will come through on what you say that you will come through on, right? So what exactly is going on here that is very specific that all of these people probably seem to know about and that perhaps we do not as we read it? Well, there's two things that are really going on here that Jesus is addressing. And the first one is this: premeditated deceit, where you decide in advance that you want to deceive someone through what you are promising, and you are going to use very specific language that will make them think one thing but will get you off the hook on the other hand. Jesus here is addressing a game that the religious leaders are playing with religion and with their words, and it has to do with a loophole process, because these religious leaders have some technicalities for how to make promises. And it all has to do with oaths. A promise that you make saying, I'm going to come through for you on this specific thing. And oaths were something that were very commonly used in the ancient world. And they were started initially as a help to guarantee your commitment to something, to help reassure the other person that you will come through on what you say you will come through on, right? But later, generations use these oaths not as a way to reassure the other person, but actually as a way to game the system. And so they're not proactively offering assurance to you through their oath. They're actually, in offering this oath, deceptively building in loopholes in advance to get them out of that commitment at a later point. And that is a very different motivation, right? It is a very different motivation in saying, hey, I promise this to you, I take this oath for you to help reassure you. That's a very different motivation from taking an oath in order to rip someone off later. And that's actually why all this was going on. That's why Jesus earlier had told them in Matthew here to just do away with oaths altogether. You know, why are you doing them? You're doing them in order to rip people off, so don't do it anymore, right? It's not evil to make an oath, but it's evil the way that they have begun to use it. And so Matthew 5, we have Jesus just telling them, don't do that anymore. Matthew 5 verse 33, again, you've heard it was said to the people long ago, do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made. But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. All you need to do is simply say yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. Jesus saying here, I know why you're taking oaths. It's not so that you can follow through on what you're saying. You're actually doing this elaborate game in order to get out of doing what you're saying. And so don't even take these oaths anymore. Just say yes or no and let your word stand. Now, the problem here isn't really so much the oath. The problem is legalism and technicalities that the oaths are creating for these people. And Jesus says, just stop making oaths because you're doing it with bad motives. Just let your yes be yes and your no be no. And that type of gamesmanship, that's putting it kindly, deceit is what Jesus is describing here. The Pharisees have been taking oaths or making promises, but they're parsing words on what is binding and what is not binding. And that's actually what we're reading about in the text that we already read here from Matthew 23. He's saying, someone swears by the temple. And that sounds impressive, doesn't it? Like, I swear by the temple that I will do this for you. You think, wow, the temple in Jerusalem, that's a huge promise. But the religious leaders would say, nope, that doesn't mean anything. What's binding is to swear by the gold in the temple, right? So they would get out of their promise by saying, well, I didn't promise by the gold in the temple. I only promised by the temple. And everybody knows that swearing by the temple doesn't mean anything. You have to swear by the gold in the temple in order for it to be binding. Or the other example he says is, you swear by the altar in the temple where they offer the sacrifices. That seems pretty significant, right? But then you say, no, that doesn't mean anything. What would be significant is if I had swore by the gift or the sacrifice on the altar, right? It sounds impressive to say, I'm swearing by the altar, but in the end, the religious people were saying, nope, that doesn't mean anything. You have to swear by the sacrifice on the altar. You see what's happening here? This is what Jesus is addressing. He's saying you're making all these impressive sounding oaths, and so people trust you, but in the end, they don't mean anything. They've become very petty in playing this game. And Eugene Peterson has paraphrased this section with all the pettiness that it involves. And it is worth reading here. Eugene Peterson's paraphrase of Matthew 23, the verses that we already read. He puts it this way. You are hopeless. What arrogant stupidity. You say, if someone makes a promise with his fingers crossed, that's nothing. But if he swears with his hand on the Bible, oh, that's serious. What ignorance. Does the leather on the Bible carry more weight than the skin on your hands? And what about this piece of trivia? If you shake hands on a promise, oh, that's nothing. But if you raise your hand that God is your witness, that's serious? What ridiculous hair splitting. What difference does it make whether you shake hands or raise hands? A promise is a promise. What difference does it make if you make your promise inside or outside a house of worship? A promise is a promise. God is present, watching and holding you to account regardless. You hear the pettiness in their game? I mean, I think Eugene Peterson gets that paraphrase beautifully correct. You know, he's saying, all you religious leaders, you're standing around, you're saying, well, I didn't pinky swear, right? I mean, everybody knows that if you make a promise, it doesn't really count unless you pinky swear, right? I just swear I didn't actually pinky swear. You have to pinky swear for it to be a real guarantee. I mean, that's what Jesus is addressing these religious leaders here. He says, you've got a pinky swear religion. And when that's the type of religion, you have to listen really carefully. Because what was promised is not nearly as important as the process in which it was promised. And Jesus is critiquing that the process here matters more than the promise. And we all know how this works, right? It's like elementary school playground, you know, where someone dares you to do something and, well, okay, the challenge is out there, but you don't have to really do anything. But then if somebody double dares you, wow, okay, well, that's a little more concern, but we still don't have to do anything quite yet, right? But if somebody triple dares you and then triple dog dares you, I mean, there is no going back at that point. The process has been set, and it is all about the process. If someone triple dog dares you, you have to do what they have dared you to do. And that is what is happening here with these religious people. They have a process for taking oaths, and they've gamed it in such a way that this process loophole allows them to state something very definitively, even if they don't actually want to be held to that commitment. And so it shows that you're serious, but you don't want to change your life because of it. And so people are getting ripped off, scammed, or outright deceived by these religious leaders. And what's worse is that everyone agrees it's legit. Everyone would say, oh, yeah, it's true. The process was wrong. He sweared by the temple, not by the gold in the temple. And so the basic take here is, well, don't hate the player, hate the game. And Jesus does. He hates the game. Now, the issue here is obviously integrity. And Jesus is saying the way that you are running your religion, it has zero integrity. There's a great example of this week, actually, if you're a sports fan. It's pretty interesting. Aaron Rodgers was in the news this week. And you say, okay, well, Aaron Rodgers is in the news most weeks of the NFL season, right? Because he passed for a bunch of touchdowns. He's on my fantasy team. So I'm always hoping Aaron Rodgers has a great day throwing the football. But that's not why he was in the news this week. He was in the news this week because he tested positive for COVID-19. And you say, well, okay, that's not all that newsworthy. I mean, that happens a lot these days. You know, people test positive for COVID-19 all the time. But in the process of all this, everyone found out that he actually wasn't vaccinated. And you say, okay, well, no big deal there either, I guess. I mean, we got several high-profile athletes who said they won't get vaccinated. So I don't know that that's hugely newsworthy either. But the interesting part isn't that he got COVID or that he wasn't vaccinated. The interesting part is actually the comments that Aaron Rodgers made earlier at the beginning of the season, before the season began, actually. Because before the season even started, the reporters had gathered around Aaron Rodgers and they had specifically asked him the question, have you been vaccinated against COVID-19? And his quote was this, yeah, I've been immunized. There's guys on the team that haven't been vaccinated, and it's a personal decision, not going to judge those guys. Now, the reporters all heard that. Nobody asked any further questions because clearly everyone thought that he meant, yes, I have been vaccinated. But what came out this week was that he wasn't vaccinated at all, and that in that interview, he was actually playing some word games. He made a statement that sounded very definitive, but wasn't. He'd found a loophole. He avoided the word vaccination and used this word immunized instead, which he said meant that he had received some homeopathic treatments from his natural medicine doctor to boost his immune system, not necessarily that he was vaccinated. And so that is obviously not what the reporters were asking, but he was intentionally deceiving them, playing some loophole word games. Now, this sermon is not at all about whether athletes should or should not be vaccinated, all right? That is not my interest in this story at all. This story is all about integrity. Because unlike other athletes who have chosen not to be vaccinated, Rodgers clearly wanted people to think that he was vaccinated and chose careful language to make it sound that way, even though he wasn't. And that is exactly the type of loophole language game playing that Jesus is addressing with these religious leaders. Now, is this a big deal for Aaron Rodgers? Oh, probably not. He might lose some sponsorships, but guess what? He's still a Hall of Fame quarterback. I'll probably start him the next time he's available on my fantasy football team. He's probably going to get signed again for another contract very easily. Maybe not with the Packers. There's been some drama there this year. He might end up with another team. It's not going to be hard for Aaron Rodgers, though, to find another football team to play for because his main value is his ability to throw a football, not necessarily his integrity. He's not a religious leader, he's a football player. But the main value for church is our integrity. And if we lose it with people around us, we've lost everything. And what's more, we represent more than ourselves. We represent God also. And so when we don't follow through on what we've committed to or said that we believe, the stain of integrity is not just on us, but on God himself. And a lot of people have walked away from God because people who say they follow him can't be trusted. They preach a good game. They say the right words, but they're always finding loopholes when the things apply to them. And in this case, the religious leaders never even intended to follow through on what they said they were doing. They, in a premeditated way, decided to try to deceive people. So there is an issue here that Jesus is addressing that has to do with premeditated deceit. But there is also another issue that he's dealing with here, and that is opportunistic excuses. Because sometimes you go looking for a loophole because you want to do something that you know you shouldn't do. You plan it in advance. It's premeditated. I'm going to deceive you by using language here that confuses you, makes it sound like it's really impressive, but actually it's a loophole for me to get out of. But other times you're not premeditating that. You just find yourself in a spot where something you intended to do or you committed to is now going to cost you something that you didn't expect, didn't plan on, or it's going to be inconvenient or bothersome in some way that you didn't foresee when you made that commitment. And you didn't plan on being here, but well, now here you are. And so you search for some ridiculous technicality that will let you do what you want to do, but not technically be guilty, or will be a way to justify not following through on what the commitment is that you have made. In other words, you found an excuse. And we do this all the time in religion. I mean, I was good at making excuses when I was a kid, but I would say the only people better at making excuses than young children are probably religious people. And particularly, I think we make a lot of excuses when it comes to the words of Jesus. I'll give you an example for me. I remember when I was a young kid, I was in high school actually, and I had done my quiet time, and I had read in my quiet time Matthew 5:43 to 47. And it's the section where Jesus is talking about loving your enemies. And I had read this, and in the little devotional I was reading, it even, I kind of had a devotional unpacking how we're to not respond as the world does to their enemies, but we're to respond with love to our enemies, this idea of loving your enemies. And I remember reading that, I'm thinking, all right, right on, that's good, right? But later that week, I remember the first Iraq war started, and America began launching cruise missiles into Iraq. And I was in my living room. I remember watching this all on TV as the bombs flew off the ships. And I didn't even really know why we were going to war, but we were going to war against Iraq, and bombs were flying. And all of a sudden, I found myself on the couch cheering as America went to war against Iraq for a reason that I didn't even understand. And as I was sitting there cheering and glad to see those bombs fly through the air, all of a sudden I felt conflicted because I thought back to Matthew 5:43 to 47. And it occurred to me that just a plain reading of Jesus' words seems very clear that Jesus' words don't fit with what I was seeing or with what I was feeling. And so all of a sudden I was conflicted. But as I sat there, conflicted by this, rather than really change what I was thinking, I started to make excuses, because I started to say, well, surely what Jesus is saying here, it can't apply to someone like Saddam Hussein. I mean, all I've heard is that this is a really bad guy. Or Jesus, what if it's someone worse than Saddam Hussein? What if it's someone like Hitler? It can't apply to him, and it can't apply to like terrorists, to people who would, attack other people, because those people have to be dealt with. And I thought, that's a pretty good exemption, a good excuse. But the more I thought about it, the more I discovered was the problem was I didn't want to apply it much to anyone else I didn't like either. It seemed like a proper exemption could be Saddam Hussein and Adolf Hitler. But as I continued to go through life and process this, I noticed that I was always finding an exemption for these verses, right? Sports fans of other teams. Big rivalry this week. I actually met a guy in the brewery last night who was a Husky fan, and we got along. We were good friends. We weren't enemies at all, right? But that hasn't always been the case, right? I found ways to hate people of other sports allegiances. Or, as I got older, there was people who participated in a political party that was on the other side. Or when I was at school, there were people who maybe hassled me at school. Or there were bosses who treated me unfair. And Jesus' words here to turn the other cheek and to love your enemy and all of this, right? I just thought, how could you possibly do that? I mean, because you can't let the bad guys win. You got a responsibility to fight back, because they are the ones in the wrong. And what I discovered is it seemed like, at first, a small exemption for Saddam Hussein and Adolf Hitler. Pretty soon I discovered that I could always find an excuse that would exempt me from the words of Jesus. And all I was doing is making excuses. And what's more, many other church people were happy to validate my excuses because they had plenty of their own. And I found I do this with a lot of the harder stuff that this Jesus life has called us to. I mean, it's not just loving your enemies which is tough, especially in the political climate that we are in today, where we are sort of ingrained to see the person who thinks politically different than us as an enemy who must be defeated because they are trying to destroy the country we live in, right? I mean, that really ups the ante. And so we find all sorts of excuses to call people names, treat them poorly because of that. And clearly that must be a religious exemption to Jesus' words, right? But it's more than that. It's things like taking care of the poor. You see, because we're in Matthew 23 here, but 2 chapters later in Matthew 25, Jesus is going to talk about taking care of those who are in need, feeding people who are hungry, clothing them, giving them something to drink, visiting them in prison. And he's going to say, when you did it for the least of these, you actually were doing it for me. And those who don't do it, he makes it a condition of judgment on them even. And as much as we know this ethic and we try to promote this ethic when it comes to people around us who are in need, we're often convinced to make an excuse. Well, I'd love to help, but I mean, you can't just give people handouts, right? I mean, you give to someone, but that's not sustainable. I mean, I'd like to help, but I need to give in a sustainable way. Or, you know, I'd like to help these people, but you know, people need to learn a work ethic. They need to learn to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. See, there's always an excuse. Or remember, Jesus said, no one can love both money and God. That you must choose. And that seems like that would be hugely indicting on those of us who live in one of the richest countries in the world. And yet often I find myself making excuses even there. Yeah, but I'm not greedy. I just need this one more thing in my life to be happy. Or Jesus said something as simple as not even loving your enemies. I mean, that seems like a high bar. Jesus said, just love your neighbor as yourself. And I think, well, that's got to be easier than loving my enemy. But yeah, what if your neighbor is loud and throws parties that interrupts what you're doing? And what if they're obnoxious? And what if they park illegally or have a loud dog that's barking all the time? It's okay then to drive down the road and give them dirty looks. You see, we make up this convenient list of outs so that we never have to live in a way that really calls us to sacrifice. There's always a religious exemption that we would like to apply for and believe that we should get. And the world looks in on this type of religious thinking and that is always holding others to this high standard, but filing for their own personal religious exemptions and wondering, what good is this religion anyway? Russell Moore, I read this great article with Russell Moore this week, and he is kind of the head of the Southern Baptist Convention. He said this recently in an article. He said, if people reject the church because they reject Jesus and the gospel, we should be saddened, but not surprised. But what happens when people reject the church because they think we reject Jesus and the gospel? People have always left the church because they want to gratify the flesh. But what happens when people leave because they believe the church exists to gratify the flesh? In orgies of sex or anger or materialism, that is a far different problem. What if people don't leave the church because they disapprove of Jesus, but because they've read the Bible and come to the conclusion that the church itself would disapprove of Jesus? That is a crisis. Wow. That is an incredible statement, isn't it? And that's sort of exactly what Jesus is saying. You don't practice what you preach. You say you care about God, and people, when it comes right down to it, you only care about yourselves, and you're always looking just to make an excuse. And so maybe it's time for us to stop looking for exemptions and start being willing to take Jesus seriously at his plain word and let him tell us how to live. You see, when we confess Jesus is Lord, what we're saying there is no more exemptions. You call the shots, Jesus. I will live your way, and I will trust you when you say that this is the way to freedom and true life. Calling Jesus Lord means no more exemptions, no more excuses. It's your way, Jesus. I was thinking about integrity this week, and it reminded me of my grandfather. He was a former elected sheriff of Crook County, Oregon, which that's a fantastic name for a county, Crook County, and to be the sheriff of Crook County. I mean, it sounds like something out of the Dukes of Hazzard or something. And he passed away a few years ago, and I remember being at his funeral. And things that were said about him were things that I hope one day are said about me. And I wish are things that could be said about the church universally. Because what was said about my grandfather at his funeral over and over again was he was just so honest. He was a person of integrity. If he said it, he did it. He was a man of his word. And the preacher got up and he told this story because he'd been the preacher of the church my grandfather had been at for, decades and decades. And he said that my grandpa had this mule who had a bad leg. And he thought it would get better, but it didn't. And so he decided to have it put down. And the preacher said, yeah, but that's a really good mule. You could have sold it. And my grandpa said, yeah, but it had a bad leg. And the person who bought it might not know it, but I would. Because my grandfather never made excuses. You know who else doesn't make excuses? It's God. God never makes excuses. He never plays the game of loopholes. Because you remember in the garden before Jesus' death, you remember the scene with Jesus there? I mean, Jesus there with his disciples in the garden the night before he is going to go to the cross, and it would have been a good moment to back out with an excuse. Matthew 26, verse 39, going a little farther, he fell with his face to the ground and he prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will." Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. "Couldn't you men keep watch with me for an hour?" he asked Peter. "Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." And then he went a second time and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible for this cup to be taken away, unless I drink it, may your will be done." You say, Jesus was in a perfect spot to back out with an excuse. But instead he said, "Not my will, but yours be done." Because there are no loopholes for God. He was going to do what he came to do. And aren't you glad that he did? Let's be people that mirror the character of God. Hey, Jesus, we want to come to you this morning, and we want to let you know that we are sorry for the times that we have made excuses to get out of doing the thing that we know that you've called us plainly to do. And we're sorry for the times that we've perhaps given you a bad name because of our search and reach for the loophole that lets us out of something we find inconvenient or difficult. And we're thankful that you, Jesus, when presented with the most difficult moment, the moment where you were going to go to the cross, that you did not look for the loophole, you did not look for the excuse, that you decided to do what you came to do, that you died for us, and that ultimately you came back to life, defeating death and offering us a new way of life. And what we pray is that that would inspire us to follow your pattern, Jesus, that as your Spirit lives inside of us, that you would help to begin to shape us more and more. We know we're going to make mistakes. We know we're going to blow it. We know sometimes we're going to look for the excuse, but we pray that you would continue to mold us and to change us to become more the people of integrity that you've made us to be. We love you, Jesus. We're so thankful that we can always count on you, no matter what. And it's in your name we pray. Amen. I know that for many of us, religion has let us down. People in religion have let you down. But the takeaway here today is that God will never let you down. He will always do what he came to do. We're going to take communion here. Billy's going to lead us in a song, and if you have some communion elements and you want to take those, you're welcome to do that. One of the things we're going to do that we've been doing, that we started in our in-person gathering last week, is having sort of a discussion where we're having an ability to kind of talk about some of the things that we're mentioning here in the sermon, where instead of being like a one-way just kind of download of information and stuff, that we actually have a way to process and talk about some of these things. And we want to talk about some of the ways that we've found excuses in our religion. And so if you want to stick around afterwards, here in the announcement time, we're going to give you a Zoom call that you can jump into. And we hope that you'll jump in and have this brief discussion with us a little bit and able to process a little bit further some of the things that we've talked about this morning. So we're going to go to communion, and then out of that, we'll have some announcements and the link for you to jump into the Zoom and continue the discussion that way as well. So let's go to communion, and when we come back, we'll give you all the instructions for that.
I love you, Lord. Oh, your mercy never fails me. All my days I've been held in your hands. From the moment that I wake up until I lay my head, I will sing of the goodness of God. Sing that again. I love you, Lord. I love you, Lord. Oh, your mercy never fails me. All my days I've been held in your hands. From the moment that I wake up till I lay my head, I will sing of the goodness of God. All my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. I love your voice. You have led me through the fire in darkest night. You are close like no other. I've known you as a father. I've known you as a friend. I have lived in the goodness of God. Yeah, yeah. And all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. Your goodness is running after me. Your goodness is running after me. In my life laid down, I surrender now. I'll give you everything. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. With my life laid down, I surrender now, I give you everything. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. All my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. I'm gonna sing, I'm gonna sing. All my life you have been faithful, and all my life you have been so, so good. You are. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. And I will sing of the goodness of God. Oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. I will sing of the goodness of God.
Amen, Billy. That's great. Thanks for leading us in that. We appreciate that. A couple announcements here for you. We are going to do this Zoom discussion coming up here, and maybe you haven't been on Zoom as much lately, so maybe you're not as zoomed out as we were a few months ago. I hope that's the case, because we'd love to have you join us here for a short discussion. It'll probably be about 30 minutes. You don't have to stick around that long. But we're going to have just kind of a little discussion talking about some of these things. And the meeting ID and password are on the screen here. So if you need to take a screenshot of this right now, do that. And then all you got to do is open up Zoom and type in that meeting ID right there that you see on the screen, and the password. And when you do that, it'll open up into the room. And I know Christina's going to start that here now, and I'm going to join on it just slightly later. She's going to kind of welcome everybody, and then I'll join on here as this live stream wraps up. But if you want to join into that, you are welcome to do that. And the whole idea is we are a group that's trying to kind of deconstruct some things. There's some things about religion, about how we approach the Bible, things we thought about God, that there's some things probably we need to deconstruct, some things that many of us have decided aren't really working for us, and perhaps they were never really working. And we don't want to just point out things that aren't working about religion. We also want to find new ways forward, right? And so that's kind of the point of this discussion, is that we become a group who practices how to deconstruct and reconstruct. We also become a group that practices how to be known and to be part of a community, which means we're practicing how to contribute our voice or listening to others. We're also practicing, I think this is a huge value of the church right now, we're practicing how to disagree with other people, not see everything eye to eye with them, but commit to staying in the room. And if we can't practice that in this context in the church, how could we ever possibly hope to solve that out in the world? And so if you want to think of church as a practice training ground for basic kindness, what it means to live out the kingdom of Jesus, that is sort of what these discussions are all about. So I want to really encourage you to join that. One more time here, there's the meeting ID and the passcode on the screen. If you want to screenshot that and then join on with us, that would be great. Also, if you want to give, if you want to financially support the Pathways Church, you can do that. Many of you are online or even in person. And if you get any value out of this and you want to support what we're doing, you can do that by going to our website at findpathways.com/donate. And there you can make a one-time donation. You can set up recurring giving if you would like to do that. There's even a way to text in a gift amount if you would like to do that today as well. Also, if you want to join our email newsletter, you can do that. We try to send out emails probably every other week generally when we have stuff going on, just to kind of keep you in the know of things. And if you're not already signed up on that, you can message us on Facebook and leave us your name and email address, or you can email me. My email is on the screen right there. And you can just drop me an email and say, hey, add me to the list, and I'll be happy to do that. Also, we're almost to Thanksgiving. We are going to do some Thanksgiving baskets. We've got some families that are going to need some supplies for a Thanksgiving meal, and each year we've provided baskets for these families. And so if you would like to be a part of that again this year, we're going to send out an email this week that has the list of things you should go shopping for. So check that email, and if you're not on the email list, join it. Also, we'll be posting that on Facebook, and so you can check that, or just message us on Facebook, or you can email me, and would love to get you the information for that. And if for some reason you're not going to be able to shop, you're an online person, but you're like, hey, I'd like to contribute some money to buy the meat. We usually have some meat that we purchase for these families as well. And so if you want to be a part of that, you can go on our website and you can donate there as well, and just make a little mark for Thanksgiving, and I will make sure that that gets to the right place. Okay, that's pretty much it for today. That's all the announcements. Next week, we'll be online again, and maybe Facebook will stop harassing us. So we'll be on YouTube or Facebook, wherever next week online, but we'll also be in person again. This was just kind of a one-off, as our facility was that we rent was not available this week. So we'll be back in person next week as well. And guess what? You can come in costume if you want to, but we will definitely have candy, because this candy has got to get out of my house. It's just making me hugely obese, and it has got to get out of here before I turn full diabetic. Okay, so I'll be past spreading around the diabetes next week in person. You can take home a bunch of candy and go trick-or-treating. Okay, that's pretty much it. I hope you jump on that Zoom, and otherwise we will see you next week. Have a great one. Bye.